We'll do it live. Ladies and gentlemen, Hellfire.Agency. It is your main man, Exmo Joe, and I have been sick, but I am not sick anymore. We are doing the cough drops. We are doing the medication. We are drinking soul medication. We are not going to be sick anymore because we're launching a new church on Sunday, and I'm here with my main man, Nate. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great. I'm excited to show up.
Cool. You managed to not get sick so far, right?
Yeah, I've been good.
Oh, good. Because I gotta be ready. Because on Friday we're gonna go feed. This is now Thanksgiving, the day before Thanksgiving on in 2024. And on Friday we're gonna go and do breakfast at a warming center in Salt Lake. Is that right?
Yeah, the county called a code blue. So there'll be a warming shelter that night, and we can go, yeah, help with breakfast and clean up.
Cool. I can do that, even if I'm a little bit sick. Hopefully not contagious. But yeah, so right now in Utah, it is cold AF, dude. It is getting freaking cold out there. And there has been quite a hullabaloo about that. But we're going to get to talking about warming centers and the new church that's going to be dedicating some time to that. We're going to talk about that here in a minute. But I want to talk to Nate because Nate, you were in the Army. How long were you in the Army?
For 12 years.
Yeah. And how long
I
during those 12? Go ahead.
well, so I joined. I enlisted in the Utah National Guard in 2004, and then in 2006 I got a commission from RTC at UVU, and then went active duty in the Army for a decade.
Mm. What was your rank when you went active?
I was a second lieutenant, and I came out as a captain
Mm. And you were deployed?
twice. Yeah,
Where did you deploy to, if you can say?
yeah, both times to Iraq. So I had gotten a commission as a medical service officer. Old people could reference the show MASH,
Okay.
the Korean War show about like a field hospital. I was the commander of a modern field hospital, and my first deployment was probably 60 miles outside of Baghdad in a field, a huge field, where they erected barriers around the camp and set up tents, and we had basically a tent encampment. And then as the year, well, it's about 15 months of our deployment. As the deployment went on, they continued to build outposts outside of the spot. So I lived at 3 different outposts out in different areas of Iraq, in that kind of in the vicinity there. In my second deployment, I was in a place called Kalsu, which was a huge like logistical base, um, kind of a transit center. We were helping the Iraqis like basically like continue to um, supply Baghdad with all the necessities, and so we were like, I don't know about protecting, but kind of facilitating like Iraqi trucking and commerce, and then
Mhm.
we had our own missions from there.
That's cool. So, you've been pretty much in the deep of the action. I mean, that area was super hot when you were deployed there, right?
Yeah, in 2007 it was pretty violent. It was like kind of the height of the surge. There was we were fighting Al Qaeda, but also fighting some of the antagonistic militias, and yeah, it was somewhat action packed. I mean, war is it's always boring 90% of the time, and then you get that 10% of action. Like we would attack Al Qaeda strongholds, or um, try and protect the city from militia attacks. And then my second deployment in 2009, it was not as dynamic. We weren't fighting militias, but there were groups that were shooting rockets at us once or twice a week. So it kept it exciting.
Well, I guess so. I guess you got to thank your lucky stars for a little bit of entertainment. It
Yeah.
could be better than having people shooting rockets at you, but okay. um, But during that time, you and I talked first time a few weeks ago,
Mhm.
and you're talking about a shared pet peeve of ours is this phrase atheists in foxholes. There are no atheists in foxholes. What's your pet peeve about that based on your experience?
Yeah, that expression irritates me because I think it's more like propaganda by Christians to assume or hope that nobody could tolerate being an atheist at war, that you would like fall on the crutch of theism or belief in God because it was dangerous. But that's not true. I mean, part of the reason I joined the army is my grandfather had served in the Korean War, and as far as I know, he was a lifelong atheist, and he served in probably worse conditions than I ever did in Korea in that war as a lifelong atheist. And I was raised Mormon, so I grew up in the church, served a mission, and so I had been a devout member and believer. But by about a year or two after my mission, I was done with it. It had fallen apart, and I had become an atheist, and then joined the army, and then deployed, and never once considered. I didn't find any use for prayer or faith when I was at war.
Yeah, see, I think that's the thing is that people who say things like there are no atheists in foxholes are like the same people who say, everybody's confident until you're on the plane that's going down, and then all of a sudden there's no atheists. Everybody's crying out for God. Everybody's praying. I'm like, what you're basically saying is that people believe in God when they're afraid to die, and it's like that's it, and it's like you should respect yourself enough, it seems, to look at that and say, well, my faith is about more than just a fear of what happens to me when I
Yeah.
die.
And as far as you know, the faith didn't stop any of those planes from crashing.
Right,
Planes still
right,
crash. Yeah.
right. Right. I mean, they've done studies on, people praying over illnesses, and it's like, and it's shown that you're no more likely to be cured of an illness than the average person just because you were praying, or even if you had a variety of different gods you pray to, and why would it be different with airplanes?
Right.
So I'm not sure. But anyway, so that's why it's been interesting to me to look at this and say, we have a modern culture where nuns, people who have no association to any religion that they claim whatsoever, are the fastest growing religious group in the whole country. It would make sense that you would expect in the military that it should be proportionate. Now, not exactly, but the military generally tends to be something of a microcosm, it seems to me, of the society at large. Is that your experience?
Yeah, I think so. Probably proportionally, whatever the percentage of nuns there are in U.S. society, there would be in the military. But the military also, at least when I was in, continues to have kind of a bias against it. Well, U.S. society has a bias against atheism still, and it did in the military. So I was pretty close-lipped about it. I was like a closet atheist, and of course, I met and befriended atheists in the army, and I used to enjoy, and I still really enjoyed the chaplains, like the role that they played in the army as like non-combatants, and usually very compassionate figures in a military unit. And like I'd have lunch with the chaplains, and if I remember at least once one of the chaplains found out that I was an atheist, and he was really irritated by it. But it didn't have any impact on my service, and like
What did
I
he
think it
say to you?
surprised him and irritated him.
What did he say?
I don't remember exactly. It's been so long. I mean, this was 2008. I'm sitting at lunch and said something about, well, I don't believe that. And just the shock on his face and the kind of sputtering, like, well, what about this? Like, no, I don't believe, I don't care.
That is, you have to admit though, it is a pretty curious thing. Go on a mission believer, supposedly. I don't know, maybe, you say came back and became an atheist. See, that was my story, was that like I went to Peru for 2 years and didn't come back and do anything brave, like join the military. Thought about maybe a minute, maybe a minute, like maybe I should before I get married, before I settle down, maybe I should go and join the Marines and do a tour. Maybe I should do that. I'm like, no, I'm way too fat. No way am I doing that. So but when I was in Peru, I had those doubts, those seeds of doubts, the sausage making of faith that caused me to go. And that's what my book, The Core Horror Argument, was about, the sausage making of faith made me go, it's not that I don't believe in the church. It's not that so much that I don't believe in Joseph Smith and the Book of Mormon. I don't know that I believe in God. And that was a huge crisis because like I could let go of Joseph Smith. I could let go of the Book of Mormon. I could let go of all that a lot easier than God, because God was my guy. Joseph Smith was this guy my parents believed in, their parents believed in. Well, my dad's parents believed in, my mom's parents came to believe in. But that was the church's guy, and I could take him or leave him most of the time. Frankly, I believed in it. I believed in the story, but my guy was God. God had revealed himself to me, and God was making my sacrifices worthwhile and meaningful. And then when that turned out not to be true, I said again and again, I needed to grieve, because it was like this was a huge loss for me. But like you said, similar, I think, to what you're saying, and maybe you could correct me on this. I didn't tell anybody I didn't believe in God anymore while I was on my mission. And when I came home, I didn't tell a soul for a couple of years. And but I no longer believed. I mean, now I look back and I say I was really an atheist from about 12 months on in my mission. Is that any of that resonate with you?
I It took me longer to give up my faith. I think because when you're raised from infancy, indoctrinated in faith, you don't even consider questioning it. I had a couple of experiences. My mission was, I had a 2-part mission, which is not very common, but I've been called to Texas and I spent 9 months there. And in my third area, I had a 28-year-old polygamous, sympathizing critic of the church. His story was too complex to get into, but he had started showing me, he had a book about Joseph Smith, and he started showing me how incongruous like modern LDS theology was, that what we had been taught as teens didn't match what Joseph Smith had taught. That the early church was very, very different from the modern church in 1996. And I started to kind of crack because it was obvious from what I read, like the Joseph Smith quotes and early church history. And my reaction to that was to start just like peppering questions and fasting and praying to the point of almost like death. So I was devout enough to have the like impulse to fast and pray to resolve these questions. But as soon as I started voicing them to the mission presidency, I got sent home.
Really?
Yeah. So I was sent home from my mission because of this. It was a crisis of almost history, like just trying to reconcile everything I've been taught with what I was learning about early church theology. So I get sent home. I spent 9 months like just floundering. I dated an LDS girl who just as soon as she found out I'd been sent home, she's like, "Oh, well, I can't date you. You're not an honorable missionary. You're not an honorable person, right?" So I get it. I'm kind of getting my ass kicked at home as a dishonorable missionary, and then I find out that my parents had petitioned the first presidency to let me finish my mission.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of grudgingly accept. Well, the first presidency had granted it, and I accepted it because I just felt so lost. I felt unmoored by the experience because I'd been taught that I needed to finish the mission. It was like the only honorable way to like progress through life. So then I went to Los Angeles for the remaining period of my mission and just like slugged it out. And I had so many doubts, so many unanswered questions that I finished. I've described it kind of like a robot. I was determined to like do it and do it well, but none of my questions had been answered. And I felt just absolute turmoil. So it was after all that I started just kind of admitting to myself that I hated going to church. It was very, very boring. And that there probably weren't good answers to my questions. So I quit. I was done.
Wow. After the first presidency decided to let you back on. That's pretty, I mean, but hey, like I say, I mean, that's interesting that like you didn't even have, like you say, you didn't even have a crisis of faith, you had a crisis of history. But the controversy, boy, that sure seems, did that tip you over the edge? The controversy of being sent home, the whole not return with honor thing. It's the dumbest thing. I mean, I guess even though technically you did serve with honor in the end, right? You mean you did return with honor.
Yeah, I mean, I had pretty legitimate questions, and I hadn't really broken any rules, or there's no misconduct in my life. But I still, I was sent home because of the questions and the turmoil I felt, and I felt mistreated. You know, that mission president wasn't kind in Texas, and that was a bad memory. And one of like, I mean, it was like the dominoes fall, right? Like when I was like 9 years old, I wondered how it made sense that dinosaurs had existed, but also Adam and Eve lived before death in the world, right? Whatever that theology is. I mean, I had questions from when I was young that had never been answered, and by about a year after my mission, I just realized I didn't maybe care what the answers were, because I wasn't spiritual. I'd never really felt like I got an answer to a prayer. So all of a sudden, in one moment, it was really easy for me to leave. Like I'm done. Like I won't go back.
Yeah. So it's interesting then. So you got have that experience, very familiar to many ex-Mormons out there. I'm sure many ex-evangelicals, fans of Hellfire.Agency, has similar struggles. I mean, it's surprising to me how people from a completely different religious background, when you start talking to ex-evangelicals or ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, especially, and ex-Seventh-day Adventists, and it's like, okay, we came from these very different religious backgrounds, and yet our experiences are so very much the same. Deconstructing the Bible, deconstructing the Book of Mormon, about Moses and the Old Testament prophets, Joseph Smith and new prophets. It's all pretty much the same deconstruction. But to then come home and say, I'm going to get out of my parents' house, I'm going to get my life started, and to say, I'm going to join the military. That's pretty uncommon. And to decide your entire service, 12 years service, you were an atheist in Foxholes. You were there in defiance of that stereotype. Is that about right?
Yeah, that's right.
So, and then you come home and you were injured while you were out there. Is that right?
I was injured. So I've talked about this with a couple of people. I was in the proximity of a IED, but it wasn't diagnosed as like a TBI. But it may have after I returned from my deployment, I was at home and I had like a couple of months of kind of like neurological problems. I started like fainting and all kinds of stuff, and I was pretty messed up. And so this was no, it was actually longer. It over the course of 3 years or so after my last deployment, my like neurological problems got worse and worse until one day I fainted and had a concussion, or not a concussion, seizure that lasted for a minute or so, and that was the end of my military service. I just deteriorated to a point that like when I finally had the seizure, the Army took a look at my medical record and medically retired me. So that was the end of my service then in 2015.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about, I mean, that's amazing. I mean, thank you for your service, man. You really, I mean, you really put yourself on the line. And I'm glad that frankly, medical retirement, that they updated that, because we talked a little bit about that offline, but that has changed significantly, and you were at the forefront of the major changes on that. And thanks to that, you're able to move on from your injury and from that life-threatening situation into a life where you are comfortable, you have a family. I mean, it's not to say your life has been without struggle. Certainly there's been a divorce in there, and there's been other things, and you remarried now, is that right? Or with a partner now?
Yeah.
Doing this atheist partnership thing. Good for you. You know, godless hordes got to stick together, man. Let's do it. And then you tell me about how that became thinking about a need to do something like volunteering with these warming centers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that actually is part of the story. So about 3 years ago, my girlfriend let me know that there was an activist group that was involved with equity in schools. And so I started, and I can't take, like I was telling you earlier, so I haven't been involved with really planning or organizing really any of the activities I participated in, because I had a couple of teen kids in school. I felt pretty involved with that. But when I saw opportunities to show up, I started showing up to protests against some of the really pretty terrible efforts by that like anti-LGBT activists in Utah. So I was involved with the school board protest. I spoke a few times at the school board. I was involved with this group. And then about 2 years ago, and that had kind of petered out. I wasn't doing as much with them after about a year. And then one day I got an invitation in 2022, an invitation to come and show up at a Methodist church downtown Salt Lake City and help homeless people at a warming shelter. So that kind of all followed. And so a couple of years ago, when I was free, I would show up at the Methodist church and either help like serve meals or usually, and then I finally started just showing up in the morning to clean up. So I was part of the crew, one of the sweepers.
You know, you're really humble there, Nathan, because you and I talked about, I know you now a little bit. I mean, we're getting closer, and I hope that we'll stay friends. You'll be my friend after I say this part. But you know, you were talking about once that you felt like by being able to serve, having an opportunity to have served your country, where you again put yourself on the line, put your body, your future, your life on the line, knowing that there's nothing after this. That if you get put down in the dirt in Iraq, that's it. You still went, but then because of this medical retirement, you're able to live a life, you know, of at least where you're provided for and your family's provided for, and you felt like you have all this time and you want to give back. Is that about right?
Yeah. Yeah. I wanted something worthwhile to do. I mean, I devote much of my time to my kids and the other people I care about. And then, yeah, I wanted to spend extra time. I mean, the homeless people are so like reviled and ignored and just could almost be, I mean, a lot of people forget that they're there and that they suffer. It just like breaks my heart. I can't it and I'm really proud to know the people that organized this effort, you know. So I've put the Second and Second Coalition started a couple of years ago. It's called the coalition. It I think combined a few different groups. I mean, Unsheltered Utah and some other groups. They got together and they found a loophole where while it was illegal to shelter homeless people, a
Which
church could
is,
hold
I mean,
them.
first of all, that's remarkable that church can't take people into the building to keep them from freezing to death,
Oh,
because it's illegal. That's
mhm.
like, I mean, first of all, Utah, wake up. Okay, keep going.
Yeah. So from what I understand, and I wasn't part of planning this, but the loophole was if you have a movie night at church, you can play movies all night from dusk to dawn, and everybody is welcome in the church. You can have activities, feed people, and have this gathering of people for movie night. And that loophole allowed this group, the Second Coalition, to shelter about 80. I think they're between 80 and 90 people a night. And they had to set a threshold. So this is volunteer only. So I think what they learned the first year is they burned people out because you can only do so many overnighters, all nighters, and still function the next day, right? Like so. I think their threshold the first year was, let's say, 25 degrees. I can't remember what it was, but so maybe a dozen times that winter they
So it was only
opened
that
up.
if the temperatures are scheduled to get that far down,
Mhm.
that then it's authorized to open up a building all night, have a movie night, so that people don't freeze out there. I mean, 25 degrees is freaking cold. Maybe there are people
Oh, yeah.
from like Michigan or someplace that are like, oh, that's not cold. I can't do Michigander accents, but it's like, maybe that's not cold to somebody in Saskatchewan. But I can tell you out down here in Utah, which it gets pretty cold every year in Utah. That's find somebody the next morning and call the coroner cold. That is cold. It can end you using our internet
Well, yeah,
friendly.
every year people die because that's deadly cold. If you get wet and it's 30 or less, you can easily die of hypothermia that night. And people, I think a half dozen people died that year in the cold, and that was part of the reason that the volunteer, I mean, all kinds of volunteers, just like really amazing people had put this together and really stretched. I mean, it's tough.
Right.
Because there were some consecutive nights, like 2 or 3 nights in a row, where we would open the shelter and provide all the services at dinner. There were donated like blankets and mats. Everybody just sleeps on the floor, and they play the movie. And in the morning, everybody, if I think there were donated meals, and usually there was breakfast offered on the way out. But by the third night, all the volunteers were pretty burned out. So
Burnt
the
out.
threshold now, so I looked it up. Last year, the Utah legislature, and I think because of these literal activists that started the original project, had lobbied the Utah legislature to partner and create something called a Code Blue. And that is, so then under the legislature, the new threshold is 18 degrees. It's pretty deadly cold. But if the forecast is for 18 degrees, the county calls a cold blue, and then shelters can relax rules, expand services, and identify new locations, which included something like, I remember one night last year, all the floor of the gym was full, and all of the surrounding like rooms were full of people sleeping on mats, just like covering the entire floor, and the hallways are full of people just sitting and just escaping the cold because it was the forecast had been 18, and if it was between 17 and 20 degrees, like people filled the hallways to escape the cold.
Yeah, I think you mean watching a movie.
Oh yeah. Well, we were watching a movie. There's always a movie on.
What movie did they play? Just out of curiosity.
I don't even remember because I haven't paid that much attention. When I've gone in, it's pretty busy. I mean, you're trying to help everybody get situated, and I don't know that I've ever noticed the movie. It's playing over in a corner. And, there's a projector and the table and people do watch it, but yeah, I don't know that I've ever noticed.
Sorry. I pulled this up. I meant to do it subtly, but yeah. So just so people are aware of this, I wasn't going to bring this up, but I brought up on the screen now. Those of you who are joining us at the podcast online, you should check out Hellfire.Agency first of all. But yeah, I'm showing the screen right now. This is LoopNet. It's not a great website, but it's a website where people buy commercial real estate. And I just want to drive this home, really emphasize with people. There are, most of the warming centers that I know of in Utah are churches. None of them are churches of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Do you know that I know of? Have you heard of any? Yeah, pretty much the standard is none. Now, the state, as part of their policy, from what I understand, has mandated that each city designates some warming centers out of state properties. So, like, they're talking about like old vehicle safety inspection facilities, for example, which were closed down a few years ago during the Big P in Utah here, which, on one side, great, one less thing to do with registering your car every year. Secondly, nobody has inspected these cars to make sure they're safe. That can't be a problem, right? But we're leaning into it. Hey, anyways, meanwhile, here in Utah, like everywhere else in the country, churches aren't doing great financially. And LoopNet here, if you look up specialty religious facility, and then you look up, for example, Utah, you will see properties that are for sale here in Utah. One of them, this one right here, is a property in American Fork, literally walking distance from my house. I was shocked. It's one of those cornerstone churches. They want $6.2 million for it, but apparently you have to keep the church in it. Basically, you have to keep like the current tenants in it. So they're trying to switch landlords, and I'm like, oh, I mean, we can get in there and then we can write them a new lease. I don't know what, right? But then they're like here in West Valley City. This is a religious facility, $1.5 million. And it's a cute little church, and it's just sitting there vacant. I'm sitting here going, while we have people protesting city councils here in Utah saying, how dare you let them, put a warming center in our community that's going to bring drugs, it's bringing crime, it's bringing, these people, and it's like these, frankly, I'm just going to be blunt with it, mostly Mormons are going out and protesting, saying don't bring warming centers into our communities, while at the same time preventing churches from opening their doors all night so that people can come in and get warm and keep alive, unless of course it gets below 18 degrees, which at that point you're calling the corner on people already. Meanwhile, these churches are just sitting here empty. And then, here's one, for example, in Ogden, Davis County. It's one of the places that has the biggest problems with warming centers. It gets freaking cold up there, right? And this building is $1.3 million. It's a lovely building. It's about, it was built in 1960 something. And, you don't see it anywhere in the advertising, but it's a Mormon church house. It's a church house of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And, which is growing all the time, friends. That's why they have to keep building new temples. Then you have this church over here in Ogden. Again, you got churches just sitting empty in Ogden. And then down here where I am in Utah County, there's Pace in Utah. This building, I don't know if you can see it once I click on it. You can't. Anyways, this building down here is almost 100 years old. It was built in 1930, and you look at it and you could hardly tell. It's a gorgeous red brick building, stood the test of time. I'll give them this: the Mormons, they make nice buildings, and this one they want $1.2 million for it, and it could be a warming center full time. and but it's better to let it sit empty for some reason. This is the
Yeah,
situation that we're.
it's puzzling because if we know that the church has hundreds of billions of dollars in reserve, and they could hire a staff of people in every county, probably a couple locations in each county, to staff it and feed people and clean. Because I can tell you, I volunteered, like, let's say a dozen times in 2 years. I mean, I'm not like a great player in this project, but when I was free, I would go, and I love being there in the mornings because what you see is really, really grateful people who are just incredibly grateful to have had a safe, warm place to sleep for the night. Walk out into the cold. It's still, I mean, still probably below freezing in the morning when they have to leave, and they go back to where they live. They're in our community. They're always in our community. And in like maybe a dozen times that I volunteered, I think that there were probably 2 fights where really uncomfortable people got upset and had altercations. I mean, you're talking about 90 people a night. So the incidence of like violence or drug use is really unremarkable in a population that still lives in our city after they leave the warming center, right? They don't disappear.
Right.
They congregate in a space, but they're in our city whether we like it or not. And it's frustrating that places like Davis County or Utah County don't have. I think Utah County may have a non-Mormon church warming center now, but it's frustrating that many places don't have their doors open at night with a paid staff by the church because they can afford it. We know they can.
Yeah. I mean, as a matter of fact, I contacted somebody who coordinates for the churches down in Provo. This is an interesting thing. Here's in the heart of Utah County. There is Provo, Utah, where BYU is. The city is coordinating with NGOs and local churches, non-Mormon churches, again, to open warming centers, and they're opening their doors, and they're going to help keep people warm as best they can. But the organization that's managing it has put out a call saying we don't have blankets for people. And I looked at that and I said, here I am launching a church. I'm sure I've told you, Nate, that I'm launching a church on Sunday. And it's like, this winter, this atheist is going back to church. And we need things for people to do, ways for people to get involved. And I joke about it and say, you can treat this church kind of like the Satanic Temple. It's mostly a trolling thing. We're going to get together, do this, blah, 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 blah. That's just to throw people off the trail. The fact of the matter is I believe that this church has the possibility to be the greatest atheistic, well, you don't have to be an atheist to get involved, but the non-God-centered philanthropic effort ever. And I saw this and I said, it's looking me right in the face. We need to start gathering blankets and get out there and start putting blankets on these people. They're asking for gently used, clean blankets. I'm like, gosh, they're not even asking for new blankets. They're not even asking for money for blankets. They're just saying, please send us your used blankets, but please wash them first. It's like, I'm like, holy crap, they are desperate. So I contacted them and I said, how many blankets? Let's say that I can put together an effort, people who want to bring blankets, and I'll get a van. I'll go around and ask somebody to donate me a van. I have a church now. You can donate your van. I'll give you a tax receipt. And like, I'll spray paint Church of, whatever on the side. We're not talking about it until the church launches. I'll spray paint it on the side, and I'll go out there and I'll start gathering up blankets going up and down this valley. And I said, how many blankets do you think you'll need this season? And the woman who's running it, her response, lots. And I'm like, you don't know. I'm head of the atheists. I'm building this church for the atheists, and we atheists will bring a lot of blankets. And she said, do it. Bring lots of blankets. She's like, we don't have nearly enough. I'm like, you know what? Is it going to solve world hunger? Nope, not even close. Is it going to solve, nope, but it's going to be a small project. We're going to do the hell out of it, atheist style. So that's when I contacted Nate and I said, look, what else can we do? What is the future, do you think, for things like warming centers that our church could be doing?
I think so. There's already great organizations that have done the work of organizing and fundraising and storing supplies. I think partnering with these groups is the very best. Like you had when you asked what they need, that's what people can do. If you can provide some time, volunteer time, because we can all participate in different ways, right? Not everybody has the time, but if you there are on the Second and Second Coalition, they'll ask for donations in kind. They'll ask for donations of like because I'm often there in the morning, so when I see people who are on the verge of going back into the freezing cold, they'll ask for a pair of boots or a pair of socks or a blanket, and it basically as much food as they can carry because that doesn't last.
Yeah.
So all of those supply, and there's probably limits too. So if you coordinated with a group that's providing the space and the care, maybe periodic donations of things because they don't have storage either. I think the group in Salt Lake here has a storage unit that they are periodically filling with supplies and then transferring, and they'll ask for volunteers. I mean, you have to truck it to the site. So sometimes it's bodies that are willing to like move boxes and move the blankets and um,
So you're saying that there's like a personnel shortage, like they could really use more people who can give hours of their time.
oh yeah.
Okay. So if there was, so you don't think that maybe if there was, like if we were to maintain a database that says, I'm on call, I'm available to be on call these hours. If you need somebody to give rides to people or need to transport materials, you need somebody to run to the store, you need somebody to cook something up and bring it, I'm available. Would that be a useful resource to organizations like that?
That's perfect. Yeah, that's what they hope for.
Really?
Yeah.
That's curious. We hadn't
Mhm.
talked about this ahead of time. I'm glad we caught that live because that's pretty brilliant. But
Yeah.
yeah, no, that's a good idea. Then we can talk about um, ways of helping to coordinate with NGOs, and we'll just gather up a network of people and schedule like this is when I'm available and these are the things I can do. Because it seems to me like I was at here. I should show you this. So I've been talking to you and to other people about this. Our church is going to have really cool hoods, and they're made with this really cool fine linen. That's I just went and purchased some today to practice. We're practicing. We're gonna because everybody, all the clergy are gonna wear these really cool linen hoods, and we're gonna dye them different colors for the directors, the heralds, and the luminaries who are lay clergy who don't even have to be members of our church to get involved. Those are the people who are going to do most of the heavy lifting of the philanthropy. And so I was there today buying linen, right? Fine linen. This is like nice quality stuff that you can wear like with a suit or with an evening gown. But I was there, and while I was there, I was started looking at fabric, and I was thinking about warming centers, and I was like, Joann's Fabrics charges a lot during this season for fabric that can be used to make blankets. But I'm sure we could go online and find really good deals on it. Because and then I went to Walmart just because I had to go to Walmart, and I'm like, crap, I can buy a blanket from Walmart for cheaper than I can buy the fabric to make a blanket at Joann's. But of course, if I were buying it in bulk, because I had the sewing skills, which I don't, but if I had them and I had a good sewing machine or a serger or something, and I could make these blankets, we could make more blankets than we could collect in used blankets, but they would be brand new ones. We can make them so that they're actually warm. Because I can buy some felt and make felt blankets that are like army blankets. They'll be scratchy and uncomfortable, and they won't be but they'll be cheap, you know. And get more blankets than I'd ever be able to collect from people's old used blankets. But I'm looking at it like, I couldn't look a person in the eye and give them that cheap old blanket. There needs to be
Well,
something quality.
well, quality is a consideration, but warm and cheap are really the ideal, because homeless people have a hard time keeping track of stuff, because they get stolen from, they get displaced by abatement efforts by the city or the county government. So people can't hold it. They're not going to last on average.
Okay. Okay.
So it's not so warm and cheap, I think, is the ideal, because part of the reason people are asking for blankets and boots on their way out of the shelter in the morning is because they've had things stolen or lost, and they're not really going to last very long. It's really hard for people to keep up with their possessions if they're homeless.
So what you're telling me, see, now this is why it's important for you to have these conversations, Dave, because like I'm looking at like, here's one of the things that churches do wrong, that God and governments do wrong, that we can do right. And that is, they get the church or the organization to micromanage every operation, raise all this money. The money, most of the time, who knows where it goes, first of all. Secondly, once you dig deep enough, you find out most of that money's not going where you think it is. And then they get volunteers who don't know what they're doing to do things. And it's like, this is BS. There are people who know how to make blankets. Why would I learn how to make blankets? I can find somebody who knows how to make blankets. Why would I become Mr. Warming Center champion, man? I know somebody who knows who has the inside baseball. I got to talk to people. I said, this is the thing I think atheists will do that God churches won't, is that we can look at and say, get the people who know what they're doing in there, raise the funds, get exactly what they need, and get out of their way. And I think that there's some serious potential there, because now it got me thinking, maybe army blankets are the thing. Maybe something cheap that people can carry with them. Because if it was something like a felt blanket, the other thing is that it's easier to carry, and it's a lot less, a lot less heavy than a quilt or something like that. So that's got me thinking now. Maybe there's something we can do there. What else do I need to know about warming centers that I don't know?
I don't know. It's probably a lot like you imagine. So the Second and Second Coalition in Salt Lake has enough experience and trial and error and credibility that they do a pretty good job. They often have meals donated for the evening. They often have snacks available during the night. And they have a very small, cramped storage space that's full of socks and shoes and blankets, which are the things that people can take in the morning if they
Are
ask
these
for
things
gloves.
that they buy and just keep, or these things that people buy and bring into them? Do you know?
Both. So the last couple fall, I think in October or November, they had a fundraiser. I went to the first one a couple years ago. This year I wasn't able to attend, but they had a fundraiser, and with those funds, they're able to buy blankets and mats and things that are really they're not totally disposable, but they're used pretty hard, and there's a turnover of materials, and so the fundraiser is partly to purchase materials like that, like the bedding and socks and gloves and things. But so
when you say donated meals, I don't mean to cut you off there, Nate, because I'm just so fascinated by this, how it works on the inside. Are we talking about people making something in their kitchen at home and bringing it almost like a potluck style thing, or are they getting like a commissary kitchen and cooking up big pots of soup or something? I mean, how's that done?
I think it's both, but honestly, I haven't been involved with it. I think that, yeah, I'm not totally sure, because I haven't. When I was first invited to come, I was asked to be a security or a safety officer, and so I showed up for the first probably 6 times I showed up. I had a radio. I was watching the parking lot. I was helping like secure doors and secure the building. So I never did learn very much about the kitchen. And the kitchen has its own kind of staff. And so we were kind of specialized in the group. And then when I finally started, because for me, just managing my own like insomnia and stuff, like I realized I just couldn't do the whole overnight thing. And then in the mornings, I was just doing cleanup. So I found that was my best role, was to show up in the morning and clean up. So
I bet that they need a lot of that. But let's talk about a moment, if we can, about security, because I was thinking about that today too. Because I was talking, I was on Gene Judson's show, Ladder Daily Digest, and there's a guy on there named Diamond Dave. I think he's talked about this publicly. I'm not exposing anything he hasn't talked about before. But he's like, it's weird because he's like a friend of like the Ward Radio guys. Like he goes on their podcasts and stuff, and like goes on. He's LDS. He's in like all these, these Mormon apologist stuff. But then he comes onto our programs, and it's like, oh, hey, Dave. But anyways, but he was talking about, I empathize, he says, with some of the people. He's like, even though I have been unhoused, he said, because he had a short period of time where he was using. And while he was using, he was out, he was unhoused. And he says, on the one side, it breaks my heart to see these people who are cold. He said, on the other side, I kind of see what the communities are saying about how it's not safe. They're bringing crime. And he's like, well, yeah, when you live in a state of being, he said, where you see 2 guys walking up to you and you don't, and immediately your assumption is something bad's going to happen. I'm going to get jumped or something like that. He's like, those people get defensive. They're ready for a fight. And then you take all those people, you put them into an enclosed building. Yes, it's lovely. I mean, this is me paraphrasing as what I understood he said. Yes, it's lovely to think, oh, they go through the doors of a church and they're transformed into different people, but they're not. They're the people who are going to be back out on the streets.
Yeah. So here's a good point, and something that I hadn't thought to talk about. So it's true that there's the potential for violence and conflict, but what Dave may not have perspective of is that the people who formed the Second and Second Coalition, and probably most people who are activists and like organizers of homeless services, they have relationships with almost everybody involved. So the handful of people that I've met that I really admire, who are organizing the movie nights and opening the doors, they know probably 75% of the homeless people in Salt Lake by name.
Okay.
So as the 90 people, so over the course of 3 hours, 90 people entered the church, and maybe one of those people is violent. They're conditionally allowed to come in if they don't cause problems.
Mm-hmm.
And the incentive they have to not cause problems is they can come the next time. There were people who were barred from returning because they caused problems. So the experience and the relationships that the organizers already had made it a safe place. There were not a lot of conditions placed on people who entered. I mean, they were told to give up substances and weapons, and there was a lockbox, and it was kind of so there was kind of a security system on the way in. But Melinda and Wendy and Carl and Dave and all the people who were organizing and providing the space, they both had relationships with the people who were entering, and they would explain the incentive, like, look, if you can't get along, you need to leave. And if you cause enough problems, you can't come back. And that's an enormous incentive for people to get along. And it worked really well, surprisingly well.
So okay, so it's not really a problem. So you got people who are
No.
panicked about this. See, because that's my first inclination. My knee jerk reaction was to go, you can say drugs and crime. Everybody here knows you're talking property values. And it's
Mhm.
like, and it makes sense that a church that owns what, billions and billions, let's just say, if not, I mean, closer to the hundreds of billions in real assets, it makes sense that they're not opening their doors, warming centers, and the members of the church, nobody's talking to them to say, guys, don't protest against warming centers. We're trying to keep people warm. What would Jesus do? There's no rubric about that I've heard going around this community. And it's like, okay, but it makes sense. I mean, if you had 100 strangers of any complete strangers, the likelihood that one of them is violent, probably good, or is using, probably high, right?
Yep.
But if you got 100 people, and who are invited back and saying, look, don't bring everybody with you, but when you are cold, come back. That makes more sense. Then it's less of a security problem. But like you said, there will be security problems. And in that situation, I think the worst thing that you can do is call the police, because police aren't trained to handle these situations. I'm being generous, friends out there in law enforcement. I'm being kind. I actually do believe it too. But it's like you're asking them to do something they don't have resources to handle. So in that case, it does make sense to have either volunteers or maybe even better, private security that you can hire and bring in and say, you know, what do you think? How much security need is there, and what kind of security do you think is necessary?
Really minimal if you consider that the organizers are already experts and friends with the, these people. Because I mean, consider right now while we're talking, it's 40 degrees outside, and all the people that would potentially come to a warming center are in our community.
Right.
They're under the bridge or they're behind a building. They're shivering. They're trying to survive this winter in the cold. When they're invited to converge on this spot, they have a lot of incentives because they're just as rational as we are. We shouldn't assume that they're not, right? I think that maybe some people, do they assume that homeless people aren't rational or that they're not able to behave themselves? Well, they are, and they have a lot of incentive if they want to come the next night, especially because
And
they've been invited
so
by their friends who organize this to be on their best behavior and manage their frustrations, because being in a warming shelter is it's frustrating and humiliating, and it's challenging in itself, but it's worked surprisingly well. Like it works.
See, here's the thing I was looking at. It's like, and the other thing is that like something like substances becomes an easy way to judge people too. It's like people will say,
Mhm.
"Oh, you could have people there who are like on what's a safe word." Well, let's see if this gets flagged. Who are on Skag, right? And it's
Mhm.
like who are on the poppy, and it's like, and I'm like, and they'll say, well, you don't want those people in a building in your community, in your building or in your community. I'm like, okay, it may not be pleasant for
Outside,
you to look at, but do you know how docile people on the poppy are? I mean, when you're in that state, you're hurting nobody. It's like people who are on the who are sharing the flour, maybe with water, maybe otherwise. The people who are on the flour, do you know how docile these people are? I don't care. I They still have to get warm. They're still human beings, and it's shocking to me because anybody who's loved an addict or been an addict. I've never been an addict, thank goodness, but I've loved an addict. I've loved a few. And when people talk about, oh, you don't want addicts in your neighborhood, it's like even people who have been addicts, I look at it and I say, that is so easy to say until you've been the person who's up all night going, is he okay out there? Where is he? Is he cold? Is he hungry? I wish he would call me. I wish he would just tell me where he is. I don't care if he's using. I don't care. I just don't want him to be cold. And it's like, to consider that somebody says like if they're using, then they don't deserve help. I look at it and go, no. It's if they're violent, that's one thing to say. You can't threaten or hurt other people in our space. But how likely is it? I guess the security question for me is like, is it plausible for non-professional, volunteers to be able to handle the situation with, hey, guy, you've had a little much. Maybe come with me. We're going to find some place for you to go. And then just handle that one person without having to say, we're calling the police, or we're calling, or let's call the security guys to come in here. And, nobody has to take the guy out back and rough him up. You don't need the mafia.
Well, so I've witnessed a couple of incidents, but I can say that nobody in the community, those homeowners in the vicinity, were not at risk, not in any way. There's no change to the risk level in the neighborhood because you've offered coffee to a homeless person. If you think about risk management, like tonight, let's say there's a homeless person that lives within a mile of where you're at. Maybe they're using drugs. And then tomorrow there's 80 of them, homeless people, who may or may not be using substances. The risk assessment for your neighborhood hasn't changed because the people that invited into that space they have those relationships. They're very experienced with de-escalation, let's say, and they're providing all these incentives to people, like the food and the warm place to stay. And it doesn't change the risk to a person to offer shelter.
So if I'm understanding you right, there's nobody there wearing body armor at these warming centers. Is that right?
Just me and some other guys wearing a lanyard with our name on it. Like, that's it. Like, it was just somebody like me.
Okay. So there's probably not a lot of concern. And frankly, if people are concerned about, substances in their area, it's like, do you know how people get access to pills? I mean, it's like, it's insane. If you think these are not in your neighborhood now, you are out your damn mind. I mean, it's
already there
all around you. Right. Exactly. It's when it's visible, they worry about property values going down. It's like, screw your property values. They need to come down anyways. How many of us can't afford homes in this country anymore? But okay, but that's good to know. What before we move on to the next subject, what else is there? Anything else? Because I know you had a list there of things you want to talk about when it comes to warming centers.
Well, that's really it. I think I've gotten through the couple of notes I've taken.
Okay, so if I understand correctly, then some things that I have learned here from this conversation is that we could use more personnel, more organization of personnel, and with like a database of skill sets that they have and ways that they are willing to volunteer. In addition, of course, I think that it does make sense to collect money because, of course, there are people who are going to get passionate about it, who are going to learn about it, too far away to send blankets or something, if you need it. So we need I feel like we need a high transparency funding operation where you see where the money's going and you see that the money is going to helping people and that the people who are gathering it are, I'm not going to say atheists because, we're definitely going to get people who are not atheists to participate in this, but people who are dedicated to a level of integrity where it's like, we're not collecting money for the Vatican Bank. We're not collecting money for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints or the More Good Foundation or anything like that. We're collecting this money and we guarantee this money is going to putting blankets on people, putting food in people, putting people who are at risk into a better situation. And that seems to me like it's that is a huge, and I just want to say one more, because you brought this up to me aware. And those people have to be not tangentially connected to the NGOs who are already doing the work, but directly involved, maybe even bringing them in and featuring them. Hey, here's so-and-so from second is what we call second and second coalition. They're going to talk to us about what needs to happen this week in Ogden, this week in, Los Angeles, this week in, get them, bring them in tight and make them part of the solution and get out of their way. Is that about right? I like that. I like that a lot. We'll see if they want to be involved with us. So that's pretty cool, man. I really love this. I wanted to ask you about food. Okay, so we did briefly talk about that, but you had mentioned something that flagged in my brain about kitchens. You said that you weren't involved in the kitchen because most churches have a kitchen, and Mormon
church, has a kitchen in the basement.
Okay, and I know that the Mormon churches, they always have like pretty surprisingly rudimentary, little ovens and ranges and things. But like real churches, sorry, Mormons, real churches oftentimes have like commercial grade, like bakery ovens and stuff like that. Do you know anything about that? And either way, do they at least warm food at the church when they do it, or do they expect people to bring it ready to serve?
Kitchen in the Methodist Church. So that this Thursday, it's at the Episcopal. Let's see, the Episcopal Church is not far away from the Methodist Church that I have been to. The kitchen was pretty similar to what I remember at Mormon Church. I think the food is brought in prepared, and then there's a lot of non-perishable snacks and lots of coffee being made. That's so. Besides that, I don't remember the details.
Well, now we got into the root of why the Mormons won't let them won't
The
put
coffee.
If you have to have coffee, then
deal breaker.
Deal breaker.
Yeah.
By the way,
those homeless people, they shouldn't drink coffee.
That's right. And how do you think you ended up where you are? Coffee's addictive.
Right.
Okay, maybe that's enough of that. By the way,
no, and the thing is, so one thing that I think is great that I remember I think one of the first times I went, there was a LDS lady who had come to volunteer with Second and Second, and because everybody's invited, I mean, there's no litmus test for volunteering with these groups, and there's an LDS lady, and someone had asked her to make coffee, and she didn't know how, and that's cool. So I made coffee, like no big deal. So she went and did other worthwhile things. So I mean, there is a real diversity of people who volunteer. I have no idea what the demographics are. There's LDS people and atheists, and of course there were Methodists because they were hosting. But it's people can contribute in maybe ways that they haven't imagined if they just give it a shot.
Do you find that the people who volunteer with the NGO, let's say Second and Second or something like that, they know the people, but then those people know each other, like know the people at the church? Like, do they? I mean, you're there all night together or whatever amount of time together. You're going to get to know each other, right? You're gonna coordinate between each other, right?
Yeah, I mean, there by the second or third night, I mean, there were a lot of people that I recognized that I'd interacted with, and just it felt like I had a good rapport with, and because homeless people, just like anybody else, because they're just like normal human beings, they when I started mopping the floor, one of the homeless guys who'd been there in shelter, he grabbed a mop too. I mean, it's really nice. It's a really nice setting because I mean, some people are shuffling out the door to go and find a place to survive the next day, and other people with maybe a little bit more, energy or whatever, they're cleaning alongside the volunteers, and you get to chat and have a conversation. Like, it's such a nice setting. It's a shame that more people don't try it and show up. I mean, I guess aside from being overnight, going overnight is really challenging, and a lot of people cannot do that. But if people could, it's a really nice setting. It's fun.
So, but I guess my main question is this then. It does seem then that there needs to be not just getting chummy with the NGOs, but getting chummy with other church people, with people from the churches. Because once people find out about our church and what we believe in, what we do and don't believe in, it's almost like you need somebody assigned in each region to do some outreach to the churches themselves, other churches, because that's mainly who's going to be doing the heavy lifting on these, on facilities and on food, it would seem, and on personnel. So it's like you're going to need to be able to come out and say,
See,
we're atheists, but we're not a-holes, right? Kind of outreach.
yeah, yeah. I think if I understand, yeah, definitely like the outreach, that kind of an outreach, establishing common ground, common goals. Because I don't think that I know that there were some members of the Methodist congregation that were volunteering at the Methodist church, but the majority of volunteers weren't, right? Like,
Okay.
because the Methodist church provided the space and some of their members volunteered, but they couldn't provide the bulk of volunteers overnight,
Okay.
night
Okay.
after night. Yeah. So it was just a variety of people who from
Okay.
from the
See,
community.
this is why I got to talk to people. This is why you got to talk to people who know, Nate. So you're opening my eyes here. So basically, so you're saying the bulk of the people, the personnel, are being raised by the non-church NGOs.
Yeah. Yeah. The coalition that are
Mm-hmm.
so there's the physical space and there's the staffing. So it's basically like any operation, right? So if you have the vision of a project, you got to have space and food and volunteers, like those components. And it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't really matter where the components come from if the vision is good, right? Like so,
Mm-hmm.
the organizers of Second and Second had the vision, they procured the space, people donated food, and then people the the people who provide all the services aren't necessarily associated with each other at all.
Mm-hmm.
I'll be timed out for a second. But yeah, so there's not necessarily cohesion among all the volunteers of the services.
Okay.
They're
Okay.
just willing bodies, just people that want to help.
Okay. Cool. So then, really, it is about making sure that the NGOs have access to a database of people and know the
Right.
schedule, and know the skills sets that they have, and work together. So that's
Mhm.
cool. That'll make it easier. Um, at least then we don't have to worry about outreach to Jesus people. Not that we hate the
Yeah,
Jesus
just
people.
anybody that's willing. Yeah.
Right. So then, okay. So now here's my next question for you, and then we'll wrap up with this. So if you have anything you really want to make sure that we included, be thinking about that. But I did want to bring this back up here. Okay, I'm not saying I get really worried about people worrying. I'm saying something that I'm not saying here, but I'm looking at this loop net here, right? I'm looking at these buildings, and I'm saying to myself, why can't the church that I'm starting soon with some friends, Nate? You really ought to hit me up about my new church I'm starting. I think you'd make a great member. Uh, why can't the church buy one of these buildings, we'll raise $1.5 million and buy one of these buildings and make it full-time warming center. We could have we could hold services in there so that it can remain a church, but we are a church, and most of these churches, they have covenants protecting that they'll only sell it to another church. Well, we are a church, but then I'm like, of course, in my church, for godless people, I'm going to be like, we're going to take all the Jesus stuff off the walls, and we're going to put up a library. We're going to have a place where, at-risk youth can escape to and be safe for an afternoon and find a safe place to do their homework or something. We're going to find all kinds of great uses that atheists are going to use a church building for if we had one. But then we could have, if we're coming up with a database of people who are willing to give time to, help people out anyways, we can come up with a schedule and a staff to just do the warming center full time. I mean, is there any reason why we can't or shouldn't?
No, but having, the challenge would be the staffing. If
Okay.
you could generate enough. So I think one of the limitations of the warming shelters are that there's not a professional staff. Because if you think about the role of like a public library in the community, a public library from 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. or whatever it is a warming and cooling shelter. It's a safe place to be with a bathroom, right?
Mm-hmm.
It has a paid staff. A paid staff is such a key component to enduring service to. I remember last year and the year before, like the warming shelter had moments of like staff burnout where people were like fried because after day 3 of an all-nighter, they had to go to their job. If they could dedicate all their time, if it was a full-time job to be a shelter staffer, that's the ideal. So I think it'd be difficult. Maybe what I'm trying to say is it'd be difficult to have that space and not
Mm-hmm.
have a paid staff that was like a church does, right? For the
Mm-hmm.
clergy. Mormons don't have their paid clergy. The Mormon system works because people do volunteer for a certain amount of activity, right? But they've whittled that down to 2 hours a week of church on a shrinking demographic.
Unless you're a bishop, and then all of a sudden it's like literally
Well, they're
letting
giving 20 hours a week, right? But if you're willing to
yeah,
do that,
yeah.
yeah,
But I mean, and that's part of the excuse of why they say, the rumor is that you have to have given at least a certain amount of money in tithing, like $100,000 in tithing, and you get moved into a list, but that gets like accelerated to becoming bishops. Not just because they only want rich people to be bishops, rich men to be bishops, but their excuse is always going to be, I imagine, their excuse is, well, we only want to ask that kind of time commitment of people who have the resources, to where they can put in this kind of time to church service. But it's like you're saying, why, most churches have paid staff. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has paid staff. Don't kid yourself. I was listening to Ward Radio the other day. They were talking about these men, the Big 15, that they just get reimbursed for their expenses on, in serving the church. And I'm like, are you out your mind? They make decent money.
yeah,
Okay. I'm not going to say it's a lot of money, but I mean, when you put in like how much money they make in books that they publish in the church's own book publishing company, I mean, these men make a lot of money off of God. I'm not even fighting it. I'm not even saying it's wrong. Okay. All I'm saying is, just like you're saying, if I'm paying people in a church to do something, I want people who do warming centers full time. That is your paid job. It makes total sense to me to say
that's the ideal.
pay
Yeah,
people. You know,
yeah.
I've I got a lot of heat. I got a little bit of heat. I didn't get a lot of readers of the Core Horror Argument. I published a book a few years ago called The Core Horror Argument: A Missionary's Journey Out of Mormonism. Not a bestseller, but it topped the charts for about 48 hours. But I had put in there that I think the Mormon Church should pay bishops. I think they
Oh yeah,
should be
I agree. Yeah.
for the time that they put in.
Mhm.
Absolutely. And you can say, well, no, because the Book of Mormon says that getting paid to be in the ministry is priestcraft. It's like, yeah, that's written by Joseph Smith, whose whole
Right.
career was making money off of his ministry. I mean, he's a liar. It's a
Mhm.
way of concentrating the money to the guys at the top of the organization. Okay, that's Mormons. But here's what I'm saying. I don't have a problem with paying ministry. In fact, if I have a paid ministry, and this is the point I made in the core horror argument, then I know I can say, listen, it's not optional to not show up for the continued training on how to be a competent spiritual advisor, or how to do basic counseling. It's not optional to for you to show up with a resume that shows your qualifications for the post. And it's not optional for us to come in and say, this guy isn't doing the job. He's out, get someone else in, you know, and, and it makes total sense to me, you know, that nobody should be required to give a significant portion of their time to an organization that profits from it, whether they call it a profit or nonprofit, and then turn around and say, but that person has to not do it, has to show their devotion by doing it for free. I'm like, that you're never gonna get the best people, in my opinion.
Right. Yeah, and your project it may not endure. I think one of the things about an enduring project, like public libraries have been around for a couple hundred years in the United States. It's a model that works because you have staff that are trained and accountable to a system it's really great community service. And the homeless sheltering groups are amazing, but they're limited. They're limited by the lack of paid staff. They're limited by the endurance, like the capacity of their volunteers.
Mm-hmm. There's this really good comment just popped up while you're saying that. This person, Wolf Powers, is saying, I'm also certain. Sorry, friends, I am getting over this cold. I am also certain that many people in dire need, people I have known who are trying to escape severe domestic violence, for instance, do not want to go into a religious environment for help. I like that comment. I
That's
don't
true.
like what it's about, but I like that because I feel like that is true. Yeah. And so I'm wondering maybe if it is smart to buy churches or if it's smarter to buy other kinds of facilities. I was even thinking about this. I don't know what you think about this, Nate. What about buying a coffee shop that's open 24 hours, buying a movie theater, and saying it's not just that churches can't, you know, stay open. We're showing a movie because why go to a movie theater? That's why. And we're showing movies all night and we're just not charging for it. And if we don't charge for it, that's our business, not yours, right? You know,
Yeah.
would that make sense to do something like that and say, no, screw the church idea, go with a completely different kind of model?
I don't think that a former religious building couldn't become a neutral space. I think that's fine. You know, I mean, if one of those chapels that was for sale, if it was bought and used by a neutral group with the mission for the homeless, for example, I think that would work because people have talked a little bit about their skepticism about the church downtown where they're hosted, but they're also they know the staff, they know the organizers, they trust them, and they'll come because it's become a neutral space. It almost doesn't matter that it's held at the. I mean, it matters that it's the Methodist Church because the Methodist Church is doing something great, but the Methodist Church isn't constraining the activities. You know, they're not passing any judgments on the homeless people. So it's a neutral. It's a great space. Any space could do that.
That's a good thought because while I'm here, I'll talk about this. This is the other thing that I've updated my LoopNet. People who are curious about this, you can do this. It's a great way to waste time you really ought to be doing working for your job in capitalism. But if I come over here and under specialty, there's religious facility. That's how I found all of that.
Okay.
But then I can also click on healthcare and hospitality, and some super interesting ideas come up. This is a motel that's available for one unit. This is one unit. Oh no, this is a healthcare. Sorry. There are things like this La Quinta Inn and Suites in Kanab. Okay, it's in Kanab, but they're unhoused people in Kanab. It's $13.9 million. Now, I don't know how much money an atheist church can raise. That's probably a lot. But then you have something more like Cedar City. Here's a $6 million quality inn. Now you've got rooms that have a bathroom, a private bathroom. You got space where you could put 2 or 3 beds and put a few people who feel safe together, and they're in a room safe by, without, having to worry about and can sleep. through the night. And it's these are ready-made shelters as far as I'm concerned, and a lot of them go out of business all the time. In fact, I was thinking about going over some of these. I was thinking about, well, some of the biggest problems you're going to have are some of them aren't in the town where there are a lot of unhoused people, but they're one town over. And I thought that's an easy solution. You buy a shuttle, you buy a 15-passenger van, you buy a couple of them, you buy a bus, and you say, show up at this time, hop on the bus. You get a licensed and insured and bonded driver who's professional. You pay them for their time, and then you bus people out to a facility where they're not only warm and safe and fed, but where they can rest for a few hours, and do it every week. Do it all the time. Do it when people need it. I mean, is that crazy? Am I out of my mind?
It's definitely not crazy, but it's hard to imagine what the budget for that would be. I don't know. That is an ideal. That is certainly an ideal.
Yeah. I mean, at the same time, and I agree. That's my thought when I think about it. I'm like, I don't know how much money we could raise and how effectively we could run it, but I'm looking at going, we also don't know that because no one's really ever done it that I've ever heard of, at least nothing like that. I mean, there are atheist organizations that do philanthropy, mainly that I have seen, because we're sick and tired of people saying that we don't. Atheists don't. People say that like Mormons give so much money to charity, or Christians give so much money to charity. But how much of that is money they're giving to church? Because they don't distinguish oftentimes, between money you give to church and money you give. It's like, I give 10% of my income to charity every year. You give tithing to the church, and it's mostly going to lining the pockets of a handful of dudes. And don't give me that, right? I mean, and so I'm looking, I'm like, we don't know how big this could get. It could be, I mean, consider if you look at the scale of how many practicing Mormons, there's some leaked information, if people out there don't know, that the number of active Mormons right now is somewhere around 2.4 million people out of 17 million members of record. Okay. But an organization that has 2.4 million people and 200 years experience under its belt, and a lot of resources. And some of those 2.4 million people, a lot of those people are brokers and Wall Street people, a lot of people in Silicon Valley. So a lot of them, when they give 10%, it's not your 10% or my 10%. I'll just say that, right? And but they also give more, and then of course they have inside. But you think about it, this church, they say, now owns more real estate than any other entity in the United States, agricultural real estate, than any other entity in the United States, at 2.4 million. If the numbers that are coming out now are true about the nuns, people who are not affiliated directly with any religion, be they atheists, agnostics, apatheists, or whatever those guys call themselves, we are easily 10 times that size. And true, we'll probably never convince all those people to give 10% of their income to one organization, and nor would I ever want to. Dear God, what a nightmare. But if we could give them a way to participate, who's to say we couldn't out fundraise any large church out there and run and build something that nobody has ever seen before, the size of which nobody's ever seen before. It's almost like, I don't want to say run fast and break things, because or don't be evil, because the two organizations that ran on those premises turned out to be among the most evil organizations in the world. I'm sorry, I didn't say that. Why did you say that, Nate, about Google? Don't say shit like that, man. Be good, be nice. But I almost believe in a fail faster method. As a matter of fact, I've been thinking about putting that in the values of the church. It's like, we're here to fail faster. We want to know what doesn't work and we want to find out fast so we can fix it and try something new. But we're going to have to build on a philosophy of failure. It's like, we're going to run at this, we're going to fail doing it, but then we're going to know how you fail at doing it. We're going to fix that, then we're going to fail again. 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 And then by the time we're done failing fast, we're going to build something nobody has ever seen before. I mean, I don't know what you think about that, but I think it's a good philosophy.
I agree.
Yeah. Well, Nate, I have kept you like all night. I love that you were able to be on the show today. I'd love to talk to you about the virtues of the Church of when we have a chance. Maybe even see a future for yourself in this movement. And is there anything else you wanted to talk about tonight before we wrap up?
Oh, that was really enjoyable, though. Thanks.
Cool. And we're going to get up at what time on Friday to go and help clean up after the Thanksgiving shenanigans?
I'm getting up at 5, but I invited you to. If you meet me at 7, that's cool because you have longer to travel. So you decide how much you want to participate. I'll be at the church by 6.
I'll be there at 6. Goodness gracious, man! Come on.
Okay.
What kind of slacker do you think I am? I used to be a carries 3 chairs and the cultural hall guy. Okay, that's who you're dealing with here. Plus
Right.
2 years in the Peruvian Amazon. Okay,
Right.
1 year. Okay, 9 months in Lima and about 9 to 10 months out in the Amazon. But this guy right here, that's right.
True.
So,
you can do hard things. Yeah.
that's right. They sure can. Hey, friends, make sure that you're all subscribed and that you get more into. Thank you, Wolf Powers. I love that. Thank you for the support. And that if you want to know more about the church, I'll be publishing more information about it in future episodes after we're actually formally launched so people can do things. Right now, we don't even have a bank account. Right now, we haven't even trademarked the name of it. So we got to get those things going. And then in the future, we'll talk about that. I have new episodes of Underground coming up and of Blood Atonement coming up. Thank you to those of you who are being patient about those. I work 2 jobs and I've been sick. But we're getting back on top of things. I got amazing content coming out. I'd like to thank Nathan for being here and for talking about atheists and foxholes and warming centers today, and warming centers in Utah. Thanks a lot, Nate.
So enjoyed it. Catch you later, man.
All right, friends. Until next time, fight like hellfire.